I have never met a doctor, when I bring up the Federation of State Medical Boards, who knows what I'm talking about. Who is this federation? How have they been around for 100-some years, and I don't know anything about them as a physician? It was shocking. It was, to me, what I witnessed was beyond anything I thought that could ever be. I think we're talking about the medical councils of the world have been captured by the Federation. We should not be allowing a private corporation to be influencing medical councils like this. If we stand by and we let the Medical Council of New Zealand incorporate this into their policies and procedures, that will be the final gag on anything that a doctor says counter to the mainstream narrative. Doctors were saying, we want to be free to practice what we want without being attacked by our medical boards. One of the reasons that I'm here and I'm stepping out now is because we're getting to a point where doctors are not allowed to talk unless they talk about the mainstream narrative. And this is called misinformation and disinformation. And this is really concerning me because now it's coming apparently to New Zealand, and we have to stop it.
And Vioxx, that story is unbelievable. Merck, that makes Vioxx, who actually makes most of your childhood vaccines, was busted in court, had to pay out over $3 billion in damages for having murdered over 50,000 American citizens. And what did we discover in that court case? That they knew that their drug caused heart attacks. And when we looked at the emails that were being transferred between the people working at Merck, we found out that they had a memo that says any doctor that questions the safety of Vioxx, we will hunt them down and destroy them where they live.
Today I'm talking to Dr. Bruce Dooley, who is an American man who's been living in New Zealand and practicing as a doctor here, serving his community. Doctors around the world, though, are being attacked for speaking up at the moment. And the information that we are investigating today has never gone out in such a public forum before. It's not even known by most doctors around the world themselves. Welcome, Dr. Bruce Dooley. This is an important piece of information for patients, for doctors, for everybody interested in health now in this world situation. What is the organization that we're going to discuss?
It's called the Federation of State Medical Boards, and it is a private organization that exists in a suburb outside of Dallas, actually, Euless, Texas. And it was founded and created in 1913, so it's over 100 years old.
It's a private organization, isn't it?
It's private.
We're going to come back to that. I need to first of all now establish your qualifications. As a doctor, where did you train?
I trained at Jefferson, which is the second oldest medical school in Philadelphia in the United States. And prior to that, I received my master's in immunology and virus research, actually, at Villanova University. And I'm active and unrestricted license, still registered in Florida, Hawaii, and in New Zealand.
We need, therefore, a disclaimer for this whole interview. You are not here as a doctor, ironically, are you? Mm. What are you here as? How would you call yourself today? What hat are you wearing?
I would say that really I'm here as a concerned citizen who has information that I doubt very many other people have in the world, and I feel that it's really time to reveal it.
I'm not going to be naive here. I've worked in mainstream media, and I'm aware of influence from that period of working in mainstream. influence that really put me off actually being in mainstream media. I think it has become much more pronounced, and the subject matter today could influence the profit margin of some very big organizations in the world. So I want to establish something before we begin. Is your health good?
Very good.
Is your mental health good?
I think so, yes.
So you would have no sense of wanting to commit suicide at any point?
No, no.
And I am the same. I have no desire to commit suicide. I have the desire to be here in the world and make it a better place. Would you say that's your modus operandi?
Yes, I would.
Thank you.
I'm the most optimistic guy you can meet.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
And that is important because this medical model that we have in the world, we have all seen in the years of the rollout of the COVID response, has created not millions, but billions, possibly even trillions for certain organizations. So we have to be aware, as a journalist, Dr. Bruce, we always had an edict. If you want to follow stories, first follow the money. So this involves a lot of money, this story. All right, let's begin back in 1880. There's a quirky story you told me before we come to air about what America was like as far as state controls. And it comes from quite an unusual source. Can you tell me that story?
Yes, my lovely wife loves old books, and she pulled out a book the other day that she had bought at some book fair, and it was just a list of governmental departments in the federal government back in 1880. And she said, Bruce, she says, this is really interesting. She says, look at this in the Department of Treasury, Department of this. But I looked at, and there was no Department of Health. And I thought, well, that's interesting. And so what I take from that is that the doctors at the time were in charge of the health. And it was just basically said, this is your ball, you take care of it. It's not a federal thing, state by state, as we have in the United States.
I met at a conference of doctors earlier this year. I met an older doctor who was from England originally. Mm-hmm. His father had been a doctor. And he told me that his father's advice to him as a young doctor was, you must protect your patients from the state. It's a very unusual thing for a doctor to say now. Tell me about your background as a doctor. What was in your familial background?
Well, my father was a doctor, and I grew up around doctors. They would be over for dinner and all that. I distinctly remember that the doctors of that time were the captains of their own ship. They were not being on salary to anybody. They were independent. And there wasn't even any actually private medical insurance, as you say, until I remember a certain time when that actually happened, when private medical insurance came in. And I thought, that's pretty interesting.
Can you tell me that story, your memory of it?
Right. It was a surgeon. Actually, his name was Chuck Miller. He's gone now. But he said to my dad, Mike, he said, I took a boil off a guy the other day, off his back, and he said, Charlie, another surgeon, said, hey, next time you do that, if the patient has private insurance, just bill the insurance directly instead of the $25 that you charged the patient for the boil. And so Chuck said, he said, so I did it the next one that came in. I billed this guy's what they call private insurance. I billed him $200, and they paid it. And it turned out that at the time when private insurance was coming in to the scene, getting in between, if you will, between the patient and the doctor, that they were paying everything. Anything that the doctor billed, captain of the ship. And of course, as years went on, it got less and less and less.
It's very relevant, that story, to what we'll talk about today, because in that way it can become one of the levers for controlling how a doctor treats the patient, for telling a doctor what to do. There are other levers, as we're going to find out. But back to these halcyon days of simple medical practice, there was this sacrosanct relationship of patient and doctor. Yeah. Tell us more about that.
Well, I would like to think that I still have that kind of relationship with my patients. Mm-hmm. And because I operate as a private consultant, and I don't have any master over me. And so what it was the relationship was getting to know the patient in terms of his or her family, the stresses in the family, and so there was an awful, like, unspoken acknowledgement that whatever psychological issues may be impacting the health. And it was really interesting because it seemed like at the time that the patients would go to their trusted doctor, and the doctor would put a stethoscope and listen, and and then say, Harry, you're going to be fine. And Harry would go, Doc said I'm going to be fine. And so now, because of malpractice and all of the other things, you have to do all these testings, and the doctors aren't free to give the message that everything's fine, don't worry. It's always like, well, those tests were okay, but we have to do some more tests. So that there's that. Do you know what I'm saying? That placebo effect, which is very powerful, by the way. Placebo is very powerful, and nobody's going to deny that. That we can actually encourage patients to get back to health just through that kind of process. And I think that the insurance companies and the malpractice and all of that has really gotten in the way of that relationship.
It's very much a personal thing that you're talking about in those old doctors too. It's looking patients in the face, it's getting to know the families, spending time. So the reason for this is that period, doctors had great autonomy. They could choose among a variety of things they might wish to say to that particular patient. Has that autonomy been eaten into?
It's been crushed. And that's why I'm here.
So in this confusion, let's simplify it by going back to medicine at the turn of last century. Could we look at what that model was like and then contrast it with what's been happening now? What was it like?
Well, at the turn of last century, actually, pharmaceuticals actually hadn't even really, they were just trying to get a foothold. And so most of the treatment processes were what we would call today natural medicine. There was herbal and body work being done on people, things like colonic therapies and diet and nutrition. My gosh, the Kellogg Foundation was all about diet and exercise and strengthening the terrain, cleaning up the terrain so that you are strong and
the
you
terrain
don't get sick.
being your constitution, your body, the environment within the body. It makes such sense.
Well, the point is, Liz, is that if you're in homeostatic balance, what we call homeostasis, okay, the body will never get sick. Think about that for a second. If we were taught, so I was taught in the first day of pathology in medical school, we were taught about this homeostasis, this balance, right? And I thought, wow, this is exciting. They're gonna teach me how to keep the body into balance. And then almost the next day, they start talking about pharmaceuticals for the rest of the year, what drug to apply to it. And I thought, what happened to that homeostatic balance thing? Well, I ended up retraining myself basically over the years to go to people who would teach me about detoxification and about heavy metal toxicities and about these things that do tend to tip the body out of homeostasis, and then people get sick.
Are you saying the body has its own healing mechanisms, its own?
All the time. We're just one big healing machine. And it's meant to be that way. And, at any point in time, all of us have cancer cells in our body because, when you're producing this many cells, there's going to be funny looking cells. But, our immune system, which is, I studied for 2 years, and believe me, you get religion when you start studying the immune system at that level. Our immune system's there like sentries to take out the bad guys, make sure they don't grow. But if the immune system is punch drunk or being diverted by attention somewhere else, or just eating bad food and falling asleep all the time, tired, well then that cancer cell will get loose and set up shop, and then we have cancer. We have a cancer tumor that's now a problem.
So going back to the turn of the century, we had this awareness. But let's talk about then what happened in 1913, and we're coming into this organization of which I had never heard. Nobody I have asked has ever heard of it. And I understand from research I've done, most doctors have no idea that it exists.
I had no idea.
You had no idea?
Oh, I had no idea. In fact, I can tell you right now that I have never met a doctor when I bring up the Federation of State Medical Boards who knows what I'm talking about. And little do they know how much their medical registration actually is being actioned through that organization. But we'll talk about how
And
that...
it is a private organization. This is nothing transparent. This is nothing voted on. This is nothing that is brought out in the media anywhere that I can see in the world.
No.
And it influences New Zealand's medical council. And it influences medical boards and councils around the world, not just in America.
Yeah, I think that the international arm of the Federation was established in the mid-1990s. So it's relatively new, it's 30 years or so. And so New Zealand has joined that international arm. And it's located at the same address in 400 Fuller Drive in Euless, Texas. And by the way, that's a very interesting thing, and hopefully you'll be able to show a picture of it. This is a not insignificant complex. It's two massive two-story buildings with 300 plus employees. That is really quite a large organization.
Oddly, it's tucked away in a suburban street in Texas, but it does have a sister branch in Washington, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It's very unusual that we would know nothing about this. But take us back to the formation, so we can begin there. Can you research easily the formation of this organization? Is there paperwork? Are there discussions? Is there governmental interplay with the people founding this? What was your research yielding?
It is absolutely astonishing to me that an organization this old
and this powerful
and this much influence and power, if you would say, seems to have risen out of nowhere. I can't find it. It's almost like there's a blackout on where this came from in 1913, which is an interesting year in itself.
Why do you say it's an interesting year?
Well, that was the year that the Federal Reserve was formed, and that's a story about how that came to be. And also, it was the same year that the Internal Revenue Service, the first taxation of Americans, income tax, was done. So it was a very powerful, busy year, I think.
And this that's an interesting one just to leave hanging there, because this is big control mechanisms for money. And this organization was at its heart, it seems to me, an absolute control mechanism for doctors.
Well, I believe that. And it seems to stack up with what happened historically back then, which was, as we were talking about, the natural medical therapies were being taught. Actually, I understand there's like 2,000 medical schools back then that were teaching all kinds of natural therapies. And the friend of Rockefeller, Dale Carnegie, commissioned a fellow named Flexner to basically investigate these medical schools. And he came out with what we call the Flexner Report, which is quite famous among us that we know, which basically wiped out all but about 150 medical schools.
From 2,000 to 150?
Yeah, they basically eliminated them, their license to teach, etc. And they established a very small number of allopathic medical schools. And so there was a homeopathic medical school at the time, which actually was in my town, Samuel Hahnemann Medical. Samuel Hahnemann was the founder of homeopathy, and homeopathy at the time was really powerful. It was actually very, very much a competitor to the pharmaceutical that was just being established at the time.
As a mother, I became fascinated with Hahnemann. I read all about him, and I studied a certain amount to help my children. I had phenomenal results with babies, so that's not psychosomatic. I couldn't suggest to them. But Hahnemann was a doctor who was disillusioned with people coming back and back to him still sick, and he wanted to find something that would help their immune system be stronger. So that's fascinating that there was actually this system in America that was supporting both pharmaceutical in its early days and an alternative that was yielding good results.
And the doctors came from the same medical school, except some doctors decided to go with Hahnemann, and some doctors decided to go with Rockefeller and the pharmaceutical. And so, of course, homeopathy was non-patentable, was non-toxic.
Very cheap to produce.
Yeah, very cheap to produce. And in fact, even today, it's ridiculously cheap to buy homeopathic medications if you can find them.
And there are many people who testify to having had very good results with that, which is interesting. Rockefeller is an interesting name because when we look at allopathic medicine, which is based around pharmaceuticals, the Rockefeller name is woven throughout that, from its genesis right through.
There's no debating that.
No, there's no debating. That's well known. Rockefeller, prior to that, was really deeply invested in oil.
Standard Oil, yeah.
Yeah. So do we know if Rockefeller was part of the founding of this organization? Do we have any links to that?
No, we don't.
What's interesting from my research, though, is that when these medical schools were reduced down in number, there had to be a Rockefeller appointee on the board of every one of those medical schools. And to me, as a journalist, that points to some link that at least deserves deeper investigation. Would you agree with that, Dr.
Well, I mean, yes, and I have tried the deeper investigation after my experiences with the Federation. And all I can tell you is that who in 1913 would be interested in creating an organization that had influence initially with the medical boards who controlled the licenses of the doctors. And where did that money come from? Well, there was a lot of big money back then. You know, the Rockefellers and the Carnegies and the Mellons and and they all were together. They all tangled together. So nobody else that I know of would have had the funding to create such an organization.
It's a really interesting question mark, that Rockefeller influence, which has been profound on the development of our so-called modern medicine. Let's go to the result of that 1913 formation of this FSMB, as it's known. What were the early results?
Well, the early results were basically that the concept was that you had this organization that was a private organization that was a membership organization, kind of like the World Health Organization is a membership organization. Countries are members. In this particular case, the medical boards or councils in the states had been in existence for some of them 100 or more years. And they had the primary focus of making sure the doctors were ethical and that they were doing good medicine and that they weren't harming people. And the mandate of every medical board since way before the Federation is protect the public from harm. It's a four-letter word that they jump to, harm.
And some of the ways that played out might be a doctor who is being reported for being drunk or doing drugs.
Exactly. And that's all reasonable. It's a check and balance.
Yes.
It was a check and balance. And these were doctors that were running it, checking on balance on themselves. Okay, as I said, they basically were running the ship. So this new membership organization developed in 1913, and what they did was, because these medical councils, medical boards were government agencies, they said, we're going to have a membership thing, pay a fee, and we'll have annual membership meeting, and we'll begin to work together. And so essentially it started off as like, well, that sounds like a good idea. And it may have come about with the intention of, being able to influence these medical boards. And they certainly do now.
So then we have this very opaque board developing more and more power over the years. What has happened in the trajectory of its influence and balance on the way medicine's been delivered? Let's start with America and then move to how it's spread around the world.
Well, I guess probably the best way to lead into this is to tell you that I was on the board of a very fast-growing, very influential, integrative or holistic, if you will, CAM organization called ACAM, American College for Advancement in Medicine.
You actually, Dr. Bruce, are well known in America. You were a leader in integrative medicine in America before you came here to New Zealand in 2007.
And so what we did is we brought, we had 1,200 members. These are registered physicians of all ages. And we had $1 million in the bank. So this was not, and we were growing at about 150 to 200 members a year. This is in 1995.
And what was your purpose? What was your mission? What
Our purpose was to train or retrain, if you will, back into the more natural healing techniques, non-toxic, detoxification, dealing with how the gut imbalances in the gut influence health in the immune system. All these things that really just, these associations were never made in medical school. In fact, in medical school, and still today I understand in medical schools, I had 1 hour of nutrition in 4 years. And that was a really boring upside down pyramid that we don't even use today. I mean, so, you know, Hippocrates said, let medicine be thy food and food be thy medicine. Well, I can tell you, and probably most people understand, doctors are just not trained in nutrition and how it affects the body.
And it gets back to that idea you mentioned before. You're looking at how you get the body into homeostasis, into balance.
Exactly.
But when I've spoken to you prior to this interview, you are not averse to pharmaceutical medicine either. You've said to me it has its place.
Absolutely.
Tell us about that.
Well, I mean, modern medicine is a miracle. I mean, I'm 3 weeks post knee replacement, and I'm walking around, and I mean, there's just so many things that are just so powerful, and so proud to be a doctor in that respect. And the idea that, you know, a person high blood pressure may be connected to diet and lifestyle, lifestyle changes. The idea that you could basically move that person away from high blood pressure naturally or with some herbal things appeals to me and appeals to a lot of people, rather than just saying, look, you have to be on this drug the rest of your life. Just take this and, you know, and that's it. And so the thing is, we are being told that there's no science. Well, there's a lot of science. It's just not being told to the people. If you go and you look at coenzyme Q10 and heart disease on Google Scholar. You know about Google Scholar?
No, tell us about that.
Google Scholar, if you really want to know something, you want to get just the science, type in Scholar, and you'll go to a special Google thing where it only lists papers, peer-reviewed papers. That's it. And it's wonderful because then you filter out all of the baloney, if you will, and you get right straight down to the science. And so, for instance, vitamin D. There'll be probably 20,000 papers on vitamin D and its power of vitamin D. You know, and so the point is that this is not patentable. This is not a lot of money to be made. And most all of these studies, by the way, are not funded at all by pharmaceutical companies, which is where most of the major funding comes. One of the reasons that I'm here and I'm stepping out now is because we're getting to a point where doctors are not allowed to talk unless they talk about the mainstream narrative. And this is called misinformation and disinformation. And this is really concerning me because now it's coming apparently to New Zealand, and we have to stop it.
So to do this, I asked you about the trajectory of influence of this 1913 group. It's been growing steadily, relentlessly, but behind closed doors, as it were, behind its veil.
I'll go back to this association in 1995 that I was on the board of, and we were growing so fast. And unbeknownst to me, the Federation had the president of the, or chair of the Federal Trade Commission, the FTC, at their annual meeting, where it's on record him saying, thank you very much for telling us about this association organization, ACAM. We'll take care of them, more or less. And the next year, they came in, and because of a couple sentences in one of our brochures, they basically closed us down. They stopped what was a very dynamic growth in this field. And I didn't even know it at the time. I only found this out probably 15 years later, how they had orchestrated that. They were that far out of the picture of all of us. Mm.
So we will come back then to what is happening on misinformation and disinformation. Here I think we need to go into your own story about how you had to be answerable for your courage in looking at other options as a doctor, and how you came to hear about the Federation yourself. Tell us that story.
In the mid-90s, all of my colleagues in this type of field were being attacked by their medical boards, and they were all being attacked kind of in the same way. It was almost became a badge of courage that you had a run-in with your medical board. I was doing this therapy, which the cardiologist and a lot of people who benefited from drugs, etc., did not like, and it's called EDTA chelation therapy, which was an intravenous therapy. And I had an advertisement that had my picture, and it talked a little bit about what it did, and helping with circulation, etc. And there was one word in there called that I put certified in chelation therapy, and it turned out that the Florida Medical Council president lived in town. He saw that. He knew that I couldn't use that word. They pulled me up to the medical council and said, "You're not supposed to use that because you're insinuating that you're board certified in chelation," which they didn't recognize, and I was actually. And
could we deal with that? You did have a certain level of certification.
Well, actually, yeah, I was actually president of the Florida Alternative Medical Association. We had 130 physicians, and we had our point was we wanted to make sure there was never any harm from this therapy, that we were all doing it. Anyway, long story short, I said, mea culpa, mea maxa culpa. I didn't know that I couldn't use this word. I won't use it again. And that was that. And then a local cardiologist who was a big supporter of Jeb Bush, the governor, got appointed to the medical board. And he apparently didn't like me very much because I was taking patients away from him. They did. And he actually tried to get the board to make chelation therapy illegal.
I need to clarify that chelation therapy is about reducing the toxic load in the body. You were taking patients away in what sense?
Well, they didn't
people were healthier.
They didn't need to have bypasses after chelation. They got off their blood pressure medicine because their arteries got younger and more relaxed, and all of these things. And I thought I was doing a good job. I was doing what I'm supposed to do, right? And since 1950s, when they've discovered this therapy, there's never been a death or a serious side effect, and we're talking about millions of people. So imagine that I can, and I actually gave, kind of a guarantee. I said, if this doesn't help you, you get your money back. And the funny thing was, the medical council called me a year later, said, you can't give a guarantee like the money back guarantee. So I had to stop doing that. Well, I get called back up to the medical council 2 months later in Tallahassee. They brought out the same charge, this word, which they had already, I thought, double jeopardy. And this time they hit me with a disciplinary mark. And I didn't know what that disciplinary mark meant really at the time. But as I was leaving the room, I heard one of the board members say to the other, one of the doctors say, "Are you going to be at the Federation meeting in Dallas next week?" And I went, I heard that word before on the board of ACAM, this Federation thing. So I ended up going to the annual meeting and I signed in and I went there as a member. Yeah, and that's where I found out.
Tell us about it. What was it like?
It was shocking. It was, to me, what I witnessed was beyond anything I thought that could ever be, which was a private organization with seemingly, nobody knows who funds them, by the way, calling together these members of the medical associations, medical boards, councils, into this wine and dine. I'd been to a lot of conventions and meetings, and I had never seen anything quite with the lavishness that was portrayed here. At this meeting that I went to, all I could hear was talk about how can you, board member, get your quack, and they were outright saying quack, it was on tape. How do you get your doctor who's a quack, or now, as we'll say later, fringe doctor? This is what they're calling doctors here now, fringe doctors. It's kind of the same thing. It's just in there's a different tune now. How they were telling on paper people, the medical boards, how to get the doctor. And
when you say how to get them, how to report them?
How to get their license and suspend their license and take them out, basically. So here's how they do it, and here's how they did it this April this year. One member of each medical council is designated the delegate. And after a fine, big, nice end of the conference lunch where everybody's kind of puffy and they give all these awards out to people, and usually in the context of what they're going to be voting on, in this particular one, it was all about, keeping medicine safe in your state, doctor, from these questionable doctors who are, doing this. And if your state legislature has any of these, there's a tendency now for this freedom of medical freedom movement that's going on because we were pushing it.
Patients are pushing for it.
Patients are pushing for it. Doctors were saying we want to be free to practice what we want without being attacked by our medical boards. Well, doesn't that sound familiar now? The Federation was literally, it's on paper, saying basically, we'll help you convince the legislature not to go this way because, medical council, you need to have full control and you don't want to give away that control. So this is the way they got it.
We'll help you to stop freedom of speech in effect.
So in that meeting I went to, the delegate meeting, I saw how they make law from this private organization. And it's this way, it goes this way. There's this big, great room with velvet ropes, and all of these voting booths are set up for each of the delegate with a little electronic voting button. And they talk about policy that has been written up by the Federation in the year since the last meeting. So this is not policy that these board members have ever really seen before, but it's policy that they're going to vote on. And so they put this policy up on the screen, and I'm sitting there in the crowd going, now this is a private organization. These are government bodies. You can't make law this way. And you're a lawyer. You know that, right?
Absolutely.
But it's brilliant how they do it. So, of course, I guess, whatever whatever comes up on the screen is okay with them. That's the Federation. That looks good. Boom. And it's here to, to make, and it all sounds very, very good. And then they take that, the Federation then takes that and puts the state medical board, and each one is given to the states with their name on it. And then they turn it into law, you see. And that's why we were being attacked uniformly across the country, state by state. They were all using the same kind of policy. Well, it was being created in this delegate vote at the Federation.
It's an incredible model of control from a small group out to a very large group and thence around the world. So were you saying when you were setting the scene that you first have this wonderful wining, dining, this wonderful dinner?
Amazing, right?
There's a real carrot and stick feeling that I'm getting. Oh yeah,
here. They had a library set up there that you could take any books you want, no charge. They had all these mugs and things like that, and people are taking bags and so yeah, it was quite obvious to me because I was there for specific purpose to find out who these guys were and what they were doing and how they were doing it. I then testified in Washington, D.C. at the President Clinton designated what they called the President's Commission, White House Commission on Complementary Alternative Medicine. It was a 2-year commission of 19 members that were investigating all the, everything about complementary alternative medicine. And it actually turned out to be an amazingly great outcome, if you read it, about how the world could change with complementary alternative medicine. But it went nowhere, actually. Sadly, but anyway, I was brought in to testify what I knew about the Federation. And that I became, I guess, a target at that point in time, because what I told them was, we should not be allowing a private corporation to be influencing medical councils like this. Medical councils need to be independent, and they need to not be guided in directions that, to my mind, were because of certain moneyed interest that would benefit from this process.
I'm trying to here play devil's advocate and say, what is the plus of this? Could one argue that they are authentically, genuinely wanting to keep the standards of medicine high? And in the papers that I've read from this FSMB, that's how they word it. They say, we want to keep really good standards. I mean, I'm going to go here to one of their documents from the 90s. For the purposes of this report, they write, the terms alternative medicine therapy and or complementary medicine have not been utilised by the committee due to a lack of consensus among both practitioners and the public as to their meaning. This bit really worried me. The committee has chosen to use the term questionable healthcare practices to include those treatments, procedures, conventional or unconventional, which may be unsafe. So even in the title they give, complementary medicine, it's an absolutely loaded title.
They biased it from the very beginning.
They're biased from the beginning,
Very beginning.
which is what I see as someone who worked in mainstream media. I see mainstream media now as biased from the very beginning. If you have any alternative to the government standpoint, you are a far right or a conspiracy theorist. They have a label for you. So is that happening in our medical world?
Oh, it's. I mean, there's very few of us left. I think that it's unbelievable that have the control that has been coming down recently on doctors. You would never, if you imagine 50 years ago, me telling my dad that if I wrote something, which I did, and in an interview, I basically was telling my patients and other patients that let's relax a little bit about this, this Omicron thing coming. Let's cool down the fear, and let's just try to take a look at the idea that if you do get it, you'll get natural immunity. Well, I mean, being that I'm trained in immunology, it's been shocking to me that nobody's talking about natural immunity, about your body's own ability to build a lasting protection against a virus. And so who's behind that? Where is that coming from? Because it's shocking to me to see that the newest meeting of the delegate votes in April in New Orleans, they again did another policy statement since the time in 2021. In 2021, the Federation did a very interesting thing. They came out publicly with a statement, which we can put up on the screen, that basically said, it was a battle cry in my estimation to the medical boards. They basically said that there's misinformation and disinformation being spread around, and particularly doctors who have a inordinate amount of influence and trust with the public are spreading this misinformation and disinformation. And we think that this may be a disciplinary action by the medical council. That's what the medical boards. That was done throughout the world in, I believe it was April or May of last year. So.
Then follow that up with April. What was that?
No, actually, let me go a little bit. I'll show you how it's structured. So they put out this notice, this alarm, and again, harm. Everything has to have harm in it, HRM. Otherwise, because that's the mandate of the medical boards. Remember, they hear harm. Here we come to the rescue. We're not going to allow harm. So, about 2 or 3 months after they put out that message, they did a survey of the medical boards, councils. Only 26 out of the 70 that they have responded, but nevertheless, they were able to ascertain that there had been a 56% increase in complaints about physician misinformation and disinformation, 56%, and therefore we're going to move on formulating policy that we'll be voting on in April. create a problem, solution. That's how they did it. And in April of this year, the Federation of State Medical Boards delegate meeting in New Orleans voted a 12-page misinformation, disinformation policy, which effectively says you can take away your physician the license of your physician if that physician is giving disinformation or misinformation. Well, now, that's a wide open thing, isn't it? That's the final bludgeon to gag physicians. So it's no wonder, and now, because this medical council in New Zealand, and by the way, Joan Simeon is the CEO
of the Medical Council of New Zealand.
Council.
And she's about to step into a job with the international arm, is she not?
She has been, she will
FSMB.
become the chairwoman of the international arm of the Federation next year. I believe it's next year.
I just want to stop there, Dr. Bruce, for people to take that in. A New Zealand woman is going to head this very opaque body's international arm, and we've had no articles about that. And she is the seminal influencer of our New Zealand Medical Council. She is the one who ruled that someone like Dr. Matt Shelton, who simply said to his patients in a newsletter, I'm not sure that this has been properly researched for pregnant women, and I'm going to advise my pregnant patients or my patients who are thinking of having babies just to hold off while more research is done. He lost his license for that. That was under Joan Simeon.
Mm-hmm.
I
I actually had the same thing happen to me. A pregnant mother came in and said they will not give me a medical exemption up at the only other medical center where I live. And so I said, well, geez, let me go on. And I went on to MedSafe for the MedSafe itself under pregnancy said, we don't know, at that point in time, they said, we don't have enough information to say that this is safe, ask your GP. Well, I said, okay, I copied that, put it on the exemption, said, you've asked me, if MedSafe can't tell me it's safe, I'm not going to tell you it's safe. I get a call a week later from the head doctor at the hospital, and she goes, why did you give her a medical exemption? I said, did you read it? She said, yeah. I said, MedSafe can't say it's safe. I'm not going to say it's safe. How can you say it's safe? She says, well, the Royal College of New Zealand GP says it's safe. I said, well, I don't care what they say. I don't know where they get their information, but I'm going to say, under my watch, no. So anyway, luckily that didn't go anywhere. But I'm sad to hear that Dr. Shelton had that happen to him, because if it's not us that stands in front of our patients in a protective manner, okay, or the baby coming, who will? And yeah.
And we patients rely on that. We rely on you doctors to advocate for us to be safe, which puts you right in the middle of a dilemma when you're being pressured from above. And what is the Hippocratic Oath to us?
Yeah, well, patients? I mean, Liz, it's really heartbreaking to me because I love medicine. It's really heartbreaking to me to see this, how fast this great tradition is being crumbled because of the lack of trust. You see, I hear so many people saying, I just don't trust the system anymore. How could they do this? Blah blah blah. You know. And the point
I mean, to be more blunt, I have friends who say, I'll never trust doctors again after their experience in hospitals where they know the doctors are lying. The doctors are saying, you just have anxiety. And they're saying, I have a racing heart. I know the jab has injured me. And the doctors are going, no, it's just anxiety, go home. That is damaging.
I have some insight. I have some insight that they'll tell you. Because I am a doctor, I have nurses who, relate to me things that they would never relate to anybody else, kind of confidentially, if you will. And at the hospital that is the nearest to us over the hill, I had nurses who have told me in different times, so I know that they're not conspiring to tell me this thing, that in order for them to vent their fears to each other, they go out into the car park on break and talk about it and leave their phones behind. This is how it's gotten. Doctors and nurses actually going out into the car park to talk about, my God, I've never seen so many myocarditis. I've never seen so many pericarditis. What's going on?
Voltaire once said, man is born free and everywhere he is in chains. It applies to doctors. Doctors go into medical school free and idealistic, and then they become enchained. So these levers of power that I referred to earlier, the payment of medical insurance becomes one of the ways in which a doctor can be directed in a certain direction.
Yeah.
The license becomes another lever of power, and the threat of losing one's livelihood becomes a threat, doesn't it?
Yeah, and a certain amount of pharmaceutical uplifting, if you will. I'm in medical school. I think I told you this. The first week of medical school in Philadelphia.
This was the story I wanted you to tell, because it tells me about the very kind of doctor you were always going to be.
Yeah. So
what happened?
So the very first, it's like 1 out of every 72 got into medical school. So it was quite a, you finally get there, you think, oh wow, and the first week of medical school at Jefferson, they gave us this really nice leather black bag with a stethoscope and a reflex hammer, and it all had Eli Lilly's name on it.
One of the big pharmaceuticals.
Big pharmaceuticals back then. And I thought, wow, that's pretty nice. Thank you, Lilly. And, I thought that was going to be the end of it. Oh, no. About a week into school, we were across the street at the bar, Doc Watson's, and 3 of us, I recall. And we were just talking, isn't it great? And I remember one of the guys said, I can't wait, man. I'm going to be making a lot of money. And the other 2 of us like, hey, man, that's not what you came here for. You came here to help people. Don't give me that stuff about making money. Anyway, just about that time.
I wish that was taught in medical school.
Yeah, just about that time, this well-dressed young guy comes in, and he pats us on the back, and he says, hi, guys, you new freshmen here. And they go, yeah. And he goes, well, I'm Joan So from Lilly. Did you like our bag and our stethoscopes and reflex hammers? And we go, wow, yeah, thank you very much. He goes, guys, I like you. He says, down the road, they have that 5-star Lebec Fin French restaurant, way beyond anything we could even imagine, right? He says, I've got an expense account. I'll take you guys to, you can have anything on the menu, any wine you want. We're like, wow. And I'm like, what? Those 2 went, and I never took up another offer from a pharmaceutical, because there were golfing trips and all kinds of things. And so this kind of dance begins very early with them. It's a grooming.
It's a grooming.
It's a grooming.
It's a dance of corruption. It's a very ugly dance. And although I do feel sorry for the fact that those doctors might lose their careers for now, any of these doctors who have gone along with it but who will speak up will become national heroes. So I would ask for any whistleblowers, if you have any conscience, please put down that medical qualification for a while at least, until this is won. What is it that needs to be won back? What is it at the core of what you would like to achieve from this interview here today, Dr. Bruce?
Well, first of all, I have a set purpose here, one focused purpose, and that is we must not let this misinformation, disinformation issue reach New Zealand. Already, Joan Seaman has put out a letter to all doctors saying there are just a few doctors, they shouldn't call them fringe, who are creating misinformation and disinformation in New Zealand. And the Medical Council of New Zealand is going to take a look at misinformation and disinformation. Ergo, we're going to look at what was just passed with the Federation of State Medical Boards in April. And we'd like your input before we vote on it. If we stand by and we let the Medical Council of New Zealand incorporate this as one of their bylaws, et cetera, into their policies and procedures, that will be the final gag on anything that a doctor says that would be counter to the mainstream narrative. And Liz, there's never been a debate in this country, particularly about this COVID. There's never been a debate about the science. Never. It's always been, this is the way it is. This is the truth. And it's like the truth ministry coming from the Ministry of Health. And meanwhile, the doctors around the world who are getting these signals that are counter to that truth are trying to say something. Most of them are getting slapped down, particularly if their medical councils are members of the international arm. The ones, interestingly enough, that have that are not on the international arm of the Federation, they have incorporated early treatment program, early treatment medications such as ivermectin and hydroxychloroquine.
Japan is a country that's not controlled from
Peru,
this. Yeah.
Uttar Pradesh.
Uttar Pradesh is one of the most important studies of what we could have done in New Zealand, what an alternative was to this rollout of the COVID response that we had. Because what did they do? They put a little package together for every one of their citizens.
Well, most importantly, I think really the head of Uttar Pradesh is a holy man. Mm-hmm. He's a monk, and he's completely incorruptible, and has been known to be uncorruptible for decades. And he just said no. He says, I'm not going to say no to this if it works. And they actually felt that it did, so they handed out care packages, like I did actually.
And these care packages were, I know, over there they're about $2.70. Were they expensive for you?
Very expensive for me because I used compounded inside of New Zealand. I didn't import, but
tell us what you did. Tell us what you did for your patients.
Well,
this
prior
was
to Omicron hitting,
yeah.
Again, I put out this information. I said, look, this is not so bad, but for my patients, I've prepared a COVID. We call it the COVID Ready Kit, and it had ivermectin in it. It had vitamin D. It had melatonin. It had aspirin in it, a little aspirin, and instructions. And it was there in the ready, if you will. They call it here back pocket. But as a rural doctor, I'm allowed to prescribe and stock medications.
And what were the results? Do you know any results from that?
Oh yeah, I mean, we had 250 people avail themselves of this package, and there was not one single hospital visit.
That is extraordinary.
Yeah, and in fact, one of the patients who recovered in not unusual in 2 days he was back on time. His wife happened to mention to a local nurse how fast a recovery he had, and the nurse said, "Well, how's that possible?" And he said, "Well, Dr. Dooley, we had purchased a thing of ivermectin from him." She goes, "You gave him horse paste?" That's what a nurse said. That shows you the power of the influence of the media, that they can actually create this illusion in people's mind that we're dealing with the drug that's won the Nobel Prize. It's got 3 billion people were given. It's one of the safest. It's safer than paracetamol. I mean, there's just no harm to be done using it what we call off-label or repurposed. We are by law allowed. And not only by law, but it's right there in the medical council saying on prescriptions, doctors are allowed to, as long as it's safe, they're allowed to use drugs repurposed off-label. And yet this has been completely stopped.
And of course,
and I'm being attacked now by the medical council for that.
And there's no big profit margin in that, is there?
There's no, yeah.
You spoke to me before we came to do this interview. You used the most beautiful description of a doctor's real art. It is a marriage, isn't it, between...
It's an absolute dance between science and the art. The art, we're at the end of a fire hose of information in medical school, and we continue to keep ourselves abreast of things over the years. But at the same time, you need to be able to have some empathy and respond and have a bedside manner and be able to, grok that there's something else behind this than just, a blood test or this thing. That's not what a patient is. A patient's not just an objective thing. There's a lot of subjective to healing or helping a person heal,
And I want to quote here somebody who I know is one of your mentors, and a doctor that I spoke to last night said when she was at medical school, this doctor, Dr. Mike Godfrey, who's now in his 80s, was one of her heroes. He is just somebody, and this is a book I would recommend to everybody to read, What's the Matter? A Doctor's Journey into Our Innate Spirituality. But this is what he wrote about the, as you say, the art of medicine. He says here, I hope the practice of medicine will move from the present commercialized and mechanistic business, where patients are regarded as clients and there is a prescribed pill for every ill, to a more humane, compassionate and empathetic attitude to suffering humanity. By doing this, it will also become not only more efficient, but in my experience also far more rewarding and indeed enjoyable. And that's for doctors as well as for patients.
Yes, Mike is an amazing man. And New Zealand is so fortunate to have him. And unfortunately, he also was forced out of his registration in the age of 70 because he just was a nonconformer to the narrative.
But Dr. Bruce, sitting here listening to you, I know when you say I love medicine, that you love the best of what medicine has to offer, that you have the intelligence, the open-mindedness to look for other options. That is what I look for in my doctor first and foremost, is are you open-minded or are you propagandized? Are you programmed? That is what I look for. What was it about Mike Godfrey that so inspired you?
Yeah, I met Mike. He was the New Zealand representative at our board meetings in ACAM back in the mid-90s. He was this incredible man who had this great mana about him, and he was trained at one of the top English London schools, medical schools. And he just has the most open mind to possibilities, potentials, and he doesn't. His mind is not blinkered. Unfortunately, medical school in many ways blinkers people to this is the only truth, and that sadly leaves a lot of particularly physicians to just completely dismiss anything that wasn't taught in medical school, and to me that's a real shame. The point is that if it works, it works, and if the patients keep coming back and it's safe, then why not use it? And why be told that you're going to lose? We're going to take away your means of making a living, doctor, if you do.
That's exactly why I asked that question. What is it about him that you admire? Because he must embody the sort of medicine you would love to see trained and practiced. How do we get from here with this covert, opaque body in America that is influencing right down through Joan Simeon, who heads our medical council, right through New Zealand now? How do we get to this open-mindedness again? How do we change what is going on? I mean, for me as a communicator, number one is be aware.
Doctors that are on the board of the medical council, they don't have any idea about this federation. They don't have any idea. They are there, they're serving, they're doing what they think is a great job, and now this misinformation, disinformation thing is going to come through. But in the luncheon before the April vote on the misinformation, disinformation, they had the president of the California Medical Board, quote unquote, her letter that was excoriating. And I don't believe she actually wrote this. I think it was written by the Federation. It was read by somebody else at the meeting, and it's available on YouTube. The point is that they literally used the word in referring to misinformation, disinformation, and these fringe doctors, they repeated, they used the word scourge. Now imagine calling doctors who are talking about ivermectin, basically, and other things, and vitamin D. Imagine that it's gotten to the point where they feel comfortable enough to put that out to the rest of the board members just prior to voting. But it's all orchestrated very well to play this part in the Federation. That is, you're here to stop this scourge. You're here to stop this fringe misinformation, disinformation, because it could cause harm.
This twisting of truth that has gone on. The word scourge was used by Hitler about the Jews. Mm-hmm. So it is apt. It becomes more and more apt as we watch this kind of Orwellian language come out of things like, in New Zealand, Te Puna Hamatatini, which is the government's propaganda arm. We have a proper propaganda arm of government paid by the taxpayers here and in the future from the debt that we've got, paid to mislead the taxpayers. Is this...
I'm not surprised.
Could I put something to you? You may disagree with it, but to me the feel as I researched it was, could this FSMB be a sort of enforcement arm for big pharmaceutical? And that is why it adds up in that case that it's so covert, it's so hidden from the world's view. Is that too great a reach? Am I overreaching myself there?
Well, I happen to have thought the same thing back when I was investigating them, and I actually they had handed out audio tapes of the conferences where they were saying, how to get your doctor and all these things. And I took it to, in Miami, I took it to the world's top class action law firm. They have 400 attorneys. And I played these tapes, and I said, I can get 100 doctors together who have been beaten up by their medical boards, councils. I can get them together for a class action suit, and we can sue the Federation and open their books under discovery and find out how are they surviving. This is going to costs them tens of thousands of millions of dollars a year, I imagine, with this kind of operation. And where's the money coming from? The other thing that they own and they created is the disciplinary data bank that I finally got put into with that second thing. And the disciplinary data bank is unexpungible. In other words, you're there for life. And in my case, I'm thrown in there for one word in a ad, versus the same people that may have been, raping their patients and, all the other horrible things that get disciplined more. So all of a sudden, I've got a disciplinary mark. You have to really look closely to see that this is one ad in the paper, in a newspaper. But the point is that once you get a disciplinary mark in this bank owned by the Federation, it's almost impossible for you to get a license in any other state, because in the application for licensure in another state, they go directly to the disciplinary data bank, and you're pretty much blackballed.
Somebody like Matt Shelton in New Zealand, would his name, as someone who was censured for simply trying to protect pregnant women and those wanting to become pregnant, would his name be linked to that database? Do we know?
We don't know. Matt Shelton, and he's given me permission to say this, and he got his letter from the Medical Council of New Zealand. They copied it to the Federation of State Medical Boards. Now, why is the New Zealand Medical Council taking a suspension notice of Dr. Matt Shelton and copying the Federation of State Medical Boards?
Joan Simeon, I would really appreciate being able to give you a long-form interview particularly before you take up your post as the head of the international arm of this FSMB in America. Who will be her secretary in that position when she takes it up?
The secretary of the international arm, as well as being the secretary of the Federation's board, is a Dr. Chandri, and he's also the president and CEO of the entire Federation. And I understand that Dr. Chandri, only from a post, I can't confirm this, has a salary of $700,000 US a year for that post. So he's acting as secretary closely on the international board and also the board for the United States. Interesting.
Again, you talked about a lack of debate, but there would be many Kiwis deeply uneasy with such close ties to an Americanized health system, the Americanization of our health system in New Zealand. It's certainly not something I want. The cost in America is prohibitive for medical procedures. You told me a little anecdote about your stepdaughter and when you first came to New Zealand, you were so impressed with the New Zealand health system.
I was.
Can you tell us that story?
It was so handled so quickly. She hurt her finger, went to the emergency room, seen quite right away, fracture, have to see the hand surgeon. Hand surgeon came in 2 hours later, which is not a long wait. Stayed overnight, beautiful place with registered nurses and a little playground. And next morning,
her mother could stay with her.
Yeah,
it was very personal.
And her mom was able to stay with her. And the next day, surgery was done. And of course, I'm watching this thing, going, "Ooh, this is pretty good." And I never told him I was a doctor. I just wanted to watch. And we get to the sign-out desk. Right, it's about 2:00 the next day. And the very nice woman says, "I am so sorry, but there's a $3 charge for a soda that's not covered by the government."
What did you think as an American?
And by the way, they had just arrived from Russia. They were on visas. They weren't even, they had only been there about a month, and they gotten this amazing treatment. And I'm like, I called everybody I could back home in the States. I said, "You won't believe how well socialized medicine works." It's changed.
Tell us what that would be back in America. What would that have been?
That would have been way over $100,000 in cost. And if you had insurance, the insurance would have paid some of it. Most people don't have insurance now; it's too expensive. So yeah, it would have been a huge. And in fact, one of the number one causes of bankruptcy in the United States is not being able to pay these enormous bills that are coming out of just an emergency room visit. Could be $30,000.
Putting aside my role as interviewer, as a Kiwi mum, as a Kiwi woman, I have got this rising sense of anxiety that the head of our medical council is now going to be deeply embedded in the FSMB in America. That really worries me.
I'm not comfortable with it at all. I'm not comfortable with it because I think New Zealand needs to lead the way here and say, enough is enough. We are going to let our doctors, because we trust our doctors, say what they want to say. And a doctor should be able to say, in my opinion, X, Y, Z. And the patient say, and these are the reasons why, informed consent. And then let the patient, see, I really believe my patients are smart, and they are, and they can make a decision on themselves. They really can. If you give them information, they can choose which way they want to go. And God bless you. If you want to choose that, that's fine. My recommendation is this, but go carry on. I don't hold any contempt for a patient that doesn't listen to what I say. I don't say, "Get out of here. You're not listening to what I'm saying." But I hear that all the time from patients who say, I'd like to do something like Dr. Dooley's saying," and the patients, the doctors will say, "No, if you don't want to listen to what I'm saying," that kind of attitude is wrong. Patients just don't like it. Ultimately, I will stand by that the Federation of State Medical Boards and the international arm pretty much control medical councils. They control them, and they have for they're 106, 7 years old now, so that when they speak to the medical councils say, "Well, that's the Federation, it must be true." And they never look into it like I do, like, who is this Federation? How have they been around for 100-some years, and I don't know anything about them as a physician, really.
The medical councils may know them, but I said at the beginning, many doctors may not know them. What's your experience when you've talked to fellow doctors?
There's never been a doctor that I know of, that knows anything about the Federation of State Medical Boards at all. They just never even heard of it. So this shows you how this organization has been able to keep a cloak of secrecy about them, and this is exactly what I've seen, is that they operate in the shadows, but they have an inordinate amount of influence on medicine in the world.
And they maintain their job is to protect the public from harm. Is there a way that could be turned around on them to say, in the suppressing of the voices of those doctors with the courage to stand up and say, like Damien Wojcik, who said, "I cannot give true informed consent that this jab is safe when the COVID-19 rollout happened?
And I know Damien, and I know he was just doing it. He's the purest heart I've ever seen. Damien.
Yes, I've heard that about him. I don't know him, but I've heard that about him.
Amazing.
And courageous. For that, he was punished. He was taken down. He's been gagged. So could we say, in suppressing the voices of doctors like that who've wanted to question, that they are intrinsically doing harm, that the FSMB is intrinsically doing harm, that the New Zealand Medical Council is doing harm, is running against its very mandate? Because if you don't have the ability to question, it's being left to the very few to decide. And what if they make a mistake? If we don't have open communication, we have nothing in a society, do we?
We don't. You have to, it goes back to homeostasis, doesn't it? Balance. In anything, if you only have one side, it's a cis. But if you have, a scientific debate, which is always has to be, science isn't just always, poof, this is it. They try to make it, particularly if money's involved, lots of money. But the point is that we are looking at a situation of harm, which is really interesting because back in 1996, the Federation, realizing that the medicine that we were using couldn't cause physical harm, right? They actually voted on one of these delegate meetings, 2 new definitions of harm added on to physical harm. They added on harm, which was created with financial harm. If you had to pay out of your pocket to this doctor, that's financially harmed. And the third would be the second one that they had, is if you chose to go to this complementary alternative medicine doctor and you didn't get better, and you didn't choose the conventional way, then you were harmed. Now that's interesting. They just say financial, and also if you chose this and you didn't get better, then we could also apply to your medical mandate, medical council's harm. So they added that intentionally, so now the medical board could act on harm because it's now got 2 new definitions, and it doesn't mean just physical. Now that, to me, is very dark, very dark. Very
dangerous, as somebody with legal training, that's so nebulous, the definition there. It's so able to be, it's a malleable definition. It can be shaped according to whatever
Same with misinformation and disinformation.
It's the same.
Same.
Who designates something disinformation or misinformation? It's a very dangerous, slippery slope we're on. For somebody who's worked in media with people who I formerly thought were reasonably intelligent, Paula Penfold, who put a documentary out, I always thought she was reasonably bright. But I see her put out propaganda pieces on behalf of the government now. There's no doubt in my mind Fire and Fury was a pure government propaganda piece. It would have done well in Goebbels and Hitler's Germany. Are you surprised, as I am, that people with the intelligence and the training to do otherwise are going along with this?
Well, there's some really, really interesting, brave, true journalists that have stepped up and said, I'm not going to do this anymore, and in the United States, and have pretty much said, we are being told what to say, and if we don't do the narrative, we lose our job. And in journalism, as in medicine, if you're blackballed out, you're not going to get a job anywhere else. It's not a matter of you just saying, well, okay, heck with you, I'm going to go over here. Because over here and over there, they're kind of the same, aren't they? So same with medicine. So it's really not, the distinction between the journalist having to say that and the doctor having to say that is not too much different, is it?
It's not too much different.
Yeah.
And in the world to come, I do believe that in future generations, our grandchildren may ask us, where were you in 2022? What did you do? Did you stand up or did you go along? I mean, there are other jobs. I certainly wouldn't be able to get a job in mainstream journalism again, but I was willing to sacrifice that to tell the truth. You are willing to sacrifice what you are sacrificing to stand up and speak out.
Yes, and I at this point in time, really, this is much bigger than me. This is much bigger than me. When we have journalists and we have doctors who really love their profession, and true journalists go into journalism because they want to actually reveal something that might be opposing. They might want to present something that might counter what the government is telling you. But when the government has gotten so powerful and the regulatory agencies have been captured, and captured is really an interesting word. I think we're talking about the medical councils of the world have been captured by the Federation. And so have a lot of other agencies.
That is a profound thought. And explain that more deeply by alluding to your friend who went to a course in which he was being trained. Could you tell that
I have
story?
a very brilliant guy who's an attorney, neighbor, and he went to Oxford for his MBA in business. And he tells the story, which is really, he said, he went to this course and they were teaching him, the title of the course in this lecture hall in Oxford was called Non-Market Strategy. Sounds, well, I don't know, non-market strategy. What they were teaching these MBAs that were soon going to be out and heading companies and things like that, what they were teaching him, what he realized quickly was they were teaching them how to capture their country's regulatory agency that whatever might be, oil or gas or whatever it is, how to get around
or
regulatory or medicine. And he, to his credit, I understand, and he tells me, he stood up in the lecture hall. He said, wait a minute, what are you doing? These regulatory agencies are meant there to protect the public. That's what they're there for. What are you telling us how to get around them? That's not right. Interesting. So that's kind of an insider look and Oxford, of course, holds quite a place in world history for putting leaders out into the world.
And when I alluded before to, are you surprised that that people who are educated are willing to go along with this? For me, that's the key, that they too have children. The police who enforce and elicit government's overreach, they have children. They will have grandchildren. They have wives and families and mothers at home. Yeah. Those families will be hurt if they indulge illicit behavior. Always follow the money and see if that leads to something that raises doubts. This raises a lot of doubts for me, the SFMB, because of its secrecy, because of its inordinate power, because it's a private organization that's not discussed or voted on. But let's look at the conclusion to a 1990s report from them, Section 8, conclusion. Just want to quote this. It's been estimated, they write, this is from a FSMB report, it's been estimated that up to $100 billion is lost to healthcare fraud in the United States annually. Medical interventions that do not conform to prevailing scientific standards are becoming increasingly popular. It's estimated that in 1990, Americans made 425 million visits to providers of unconventional medicine, exceeding the number of visits to all US primary care physicians at a cost of approximately $13.7 billion.
By the way, this policy paper that was voted in was on their website for several years until I made it testimony at the Washington White House Commission. And then it soon thereafter was taken off. And I unfortunately lost my only hard, because what I did is I handed out about 100 hard copies to all my doctors back then, said, watch out, look what they're doing. This is how they're doing it. I lost my hard copy, but I went to something called the Wayback Machine. Do you ever hear the Wayback Machine?
No.
The Wayback Machine is so cool. You go back to, it takes you, I went back to 2002 on the Wayback Machine.
You Google this?
No, it's a site, Wayback.
Okay.
So what it does is it takes snapshots of all websites, and you can, even if they go out of, you can go back, and if they're changed, you can go back. It's very cool. So I went back to when I knew that this was available, and I thought, I don't know if I can even do this, but sure enough, boom, there it was, and it was available. So you cannot find that right now unless you go to the Wayback Machine, but that's still a core policy. Don't get me wrong. It's not that they just took it away from eyes to be able to see.
But what leapt out at me is this is about money. We are missing out on making all the money that we could make if we could corral the world's population into one way, the pharmaceutical way of medicine.
Well, I
that
mean,
what you're
what you
saying?
just read is an anti-competitive statement, isn't it? It's basically saying, hey, you know, this money's going elsewhere, and people are really loving it, and it's growing, and we have to stop it. Now, why wouldn't something like that be able to, why would you be able to go after the Federation for making a statement like that and say, this is anti-competitive, open up your books, show us who you really are?
It's absolutely anti-competitive.
Sure.
It means me as a patient,
Yep.
I can't say, oh, I rather like chelation therapy. I love IVC. I get great results. They know it will grow because they know that it's effective. Things will only grow. I will recommend it to somebody else if it works.
Well, you know, that whole paper, by the way.
If it was unsafe, as they're writing, and improper and incompetent and fraudulent, I wouldn't do it, and neither would any of my friends.
Yeah, but that whole paper, by the way, I mean, it's a blueprint for how to get your doctor that does this, and it talks about all the federal agencies. They list them right there: the Federal Trade Commission, which they use for ACAM, the IRS, the Postal Service. I mean, it's unbelievable that they are outwardly saying, hey, you know, you can use these and these and these to be able to get your doctor in your state that is not towing the line and doing these other alternative therapies. And wow, I mean, think about that. And they were, but of course, 1913, the Federation of State Medical Boards was way before any of the other alphabet agencies, way before CDC, way before the FTC, way before the FDA. They were there ready for these agencies to come on board. So do they have influence also in these agencies? I think so.
Well, we know that their tentacles reach in terms of getting them to send speakers over to speak to the groups, don't we? Mm-hmm. The FSMB has people from the IRS or other agencies come and speak to them, don't they?
Well, they had the Federal Trade Commission president the year before we were attacked by the Federal Trade Commission.
Again, something of such inordinate influence, and it's barely known by the population. So where to from here? What is actually? Let's now jump back to history. If we look at the Chicago World Trade Fair, you mentioned that when we were in the warm-up for this, and it was so inspiring. It was in the 1800s.
Yep, they did.
What happened there, and what is it about that inspires you? And could we ever get to that kind of world again?
Oh, this is, you know, basically what I was impressed in. If anybody wants to go and actually research it, it was the most, I would think it was 1865 in Chicago or something like that. And they had the most amazing exhibits and the most amazing inventions and the most amazing engineers stuff, you know, and it was all about new types of engines that would work you know, with certain electromagnetic things and Tesla, you know, that kind of technology. It was really amazing, actually, that there was like a renaissance, and that seemed to just got, you know, in my estimation. But that doesn't really have much to do with what we're talking about, except that maybe it does.
To me, it has everything to do with what could replace this dark, covert body lurking in the background, controlling way too much, to that flowering of human freedom, that flowering of human creativity, that questioning, that what else could we do? Mm-hmm. What could we create in this space? How do we, I asked you before, how do we do that bridge, Dr. Bruce, from here, which is a kind of dark place, it's threatening, there's persecution, to this freedom and this flowering of human creativity?
We need to disentangle our healthcare and healthcare regulatory bodies totally from these influences. We need to disentangle them. We need to, I mean, for instance, I made a OIC, Information Act, to MedSafe to find out what this committee, MAAC, that authorized the inoculation, the Pfizer inoculation, and they refused to give the names of these people. So I went to the ombudsman, and the ombudsman also had to agree that we can't give you the names of these people behind the curtain that are telling the MedSafe to approve this thing. So as of today, we don't know. And then they went and approved it for the lower age group, and finally to the last age group. So we don't know to this day who these people are,
let alone their qualifications,
or who they may have worked for, we don't know.
That is frightening.
And I went to full Monty. I couldn't go any further. I went to the ombudsman.
That is absolutely frightening, the lack of answerability. For many Kiwis, there's a huge question mark over why this government has not told us anything about the New Zealand contract with Pfizer. The contract, what is in that contract? What did this government, on our behalf as our servants, sign up to with Pfizer? What commitments were made on behalf of the people?
Isn't that
the lack of transparency from a Prime Minister who said, I'll be the most transparent Prime Minister ever. There is a karma to all of this. There is an end to this for every person who makes that choice to go to the road less travelled, to be honourable, to be brave, which you have done, to speak out even against perhaps one's own interests.
Yep.
And those who will go along, who will lie, who will dissemble, who will take money, who will choose corruption. There is something in this book
or the majority who will just not want to rock the boat because it's too painful.
It's painful. On that note, actually, what was it like coming to this interview? What journey have you done to choose to speak out?
I basically said, really at this point in time, it's, my lovely wife said, is your will up to date? and you start this conversation because really we're talking about, I believe, we're talking about interfering with powers that have enormous power and are gaining more and more power across the world. And I think little New Zealand has a history of standing up to these powers in the past with the French and with the American Navy, the military.
With the nuclear ships. And with South Africa.
South Africa and apartheid. I mean, Kiwis have this, this stuff in them that I was very proud of when I first got here. And I would like to see that stuff come back up again and say, this is not right. Our doctors should not be losing their livelihood and their medical registrations for basically trying to help a pregnant woman. We need to have the medical council disengage themselves from this international arm, number one, in my estimation. We need the Ministry of Health to allow open debate. They don't allow open debate, and why is that? I mean, we need to have open debate. This country needs to look at the rest of the world. Nobody's wearing masks anymore in the rest of the world, pretty much. And why are we still doing that?
To me, we need a total fresh broom to sweep out what's on the Medical Council of New Zealand as an outsider looking in, with absolutely new people appointed who are of the highest, most unquestionable integrity. I certainly, as a Kiwi, don't want somebody who's deeply embedded in the FSMB also heading the New Zealand Medical Council. So again, to Joan Simeon, if you would give me an interview, I'm happy to be proven wrong, but I have many questions for you. The courage it must have taken, you've mentioned your wife. Did she at first say, no, don't do this, Bruce?
No. She's a real strong woman, and she knows exactly what's happening. She's totally on board and has watched me over the years, in Florida too, with this, if you will, this movement to basically take over medicine. Medicine should be left in the hands of the doctors, in my estimation. The government should stay out of it. The regulatory bodies should only be there for real harm and they shouldn't be doing what they're doing, which is they're acting as bludgeons for what I believe is the pharmaceutical industry, actually.
A note as a Kiwi woman of the deepest gratitude that a man of your quality has come to our shores and cares so much about this country that you would stand for this level of truth.
Well, I've got a 12-year-old daughter.
Yeah.
It's for her.
Your karma, Dr. Bruce, will be a very rich one indeed.
Thank you.
Thank you for doing what you're doing for this country and for the world.
Thank you.